Galactic Council, Earth is exiled. Forever, humanity grinned perfect. Watch this. The gavel came down before I finished my sentence. 400 species watched me from their raised platforms, and not one of them looked away. That is the thing about the Galactic Council chamber. It is designed to make the person standing at the center feel small. The ceiling rises 300 ft above the floor. The curved walls hold tiered seating that wraps all the way around, so no matter which direction you turn, you are facing someone who has already decided your fate. The lighting is precisely calibrated to illuminate the speaker at the center, while leaving the audience in comfortable shadow. I had stood in this room 11 times over the course of my career. Every previous time I had felt that smallness pressing down on me like a hand at the back of my neck. Not today. My name is Leon Hargrove. I was Earth's final ambassador to the Galactic Council. I want to be precise about that word final, because it was not a title that was taken from me. It was one I chose the moment I walked into that chamber and understood what was about to happen. The charges against humanity had been filed by the Veth hegemony 14 months earlier. The Veth are a tall, blue-skinned species with 4 arms and a deep commitment to procedural detail. They had spent those 14 months building the most thorough legal case ever presented before the council. I had read every page of it, 6,240 pages. I knew it better than the Veth attorney who delivered it, a narrow-faced individual named Oren Vash, who had clearly memorized his summary and was reciting it now with the confidence of a person who has already counted the votes and found them satisfactory. He listed the charges in a steady, unhurried voice. Unprovoked territorial expansion, 17 counts. Ecological disruption affecting neighboring star systems, 9 counts. Repeated violation of the quarantine accords, 42 counts. Demonstrated psychological instability under conditions of prolonged conflict. That last one made a few of the delegates shift in their seats. I noticed. Oren Vash noticed me noticing, and he raised his chin slightly, the Veth equivalent of a satisfied smile. He concluded by requesting the permanent exclusion of humanity from all interstellar commerce, communication, and travel, a quantum lock barrier to be installed around Earth's solar system. No ships in, no signals out, no exceptions forever. The word forever hung in the air of that enormous chamber like smoke that would not clear. I was given 3 minutes to respond. I walked to the speaking platform. The cold white light found me immediately. I placed both hands on the edge of the podium and looked out at 400 species, 400 delegations, 400 sets of eyes, waiting for me to beg or argue or threaten. I did none of those things. Council members, I said, keeping my voice completely level, I want to thank you. Silence. Not the polite silence of an audience waiting for a speaker to continue. The sharp, startled silence of a room that has just heard something it did not expect. I let it stretch for 3 full seconds, then continued. You have spent 14 months cataloging everything humanity has done wrong. You have done this thoroughly and with genuine effort. I disagree with some of your interpretations, and I believe your evidence on several counts is incomplete, but I am not going to argue those points today. I'm not going to ask for a reduced sentence or a period of probation or a supervised reentry program. I am not going to appeal to your sense of fairness because I do not think fairness is what this proceeding is about. Orrin Vash's expression shifted just slightly, just enough. What this proceeding is about, I said, is fear. You are afraid of us. You have been afraid of us since the moment we arrived on the Galactic stage 30 years ago and did not behave the way any of your models predicted. We were supposed to be primitive. We were supposed to be grateful. We were supposed to be easy to manage, and we were none of those things, and that frightened you, and frightened beings make frightened decisions. The council chair, a broad-shouldered Kalan named Ursulin, lifted one hand. Ambassador Hargrove, you have 2 minutes remaining. Please direct your remarks toward the charges. I am directing them toward the charges, I said, the one that matters. The charge that is not written anywhere in those 6,000 pages, but is present in every single line of them. You are not exiling us because we broke your laws. You are exiling us because you cannot predict us, and the galaxy you have built requires everything to be predictable. Everything must stay in its lane, follow the assigned path, except the ceiling that has been set for it. We did not do that. We never have. And that is not a problem you know how to fix, so you have chosen to contain it instead. No one moved. 400 species held completely still. So exile us, I said. Lock the door. Post your quantum barrier and write your proclamations and celebrate tonight in your conference rooms. I am not going to stop you, and I am not going to pretend that I could if I wanted to. You have the votes. You have had them for months. Everyone in this room knew how today was going to end before I even walked through those doors. I paused. I just want every single one of you to remember clearly and permanently that this was your choice, not ours. I stepped back from the podium and returned to my seat. The vote took 4 minutes, unanimous in favor of exile. Not one delegate voted against it. Our 3 closest diplomatic allies, species we had worked alongside for a decade, abstained. They did not speak for us. They did not stand. They sat quietly with their eyes on their consoles and let it happen, which in that room on that day amounted to the same thing as agreement. Ursulin read the terms of the exile decree in a flat official tone. The quantum lock barrier would be operational within 60 days. All human vessels in interstellar space would be recalled or impounded. All diplomatic staff, including myself, would be transported back to Earth's solar system and released before the barrier went active. The decree was entered into the Permanent Council record with all 400 member seals attached. Done. I sat quietly through all of it. My aide, a young man named Cole Whitfield, was 2 seats to my left, and I could see from the corner of my eye that his hands were tight in his lap. He was 26 years old and had spent 3 years building a career in galactic diplomacy. He had believed genuinely and completely that the council could be reasoned with. I had once believed the same thing. I remembered exactly what that belief felt like, and I remembered the specific morning I understood it was wrong. I leaned toward him and spoke quietly. Breathe, I said. They just exiled the entire human race, he whispered. Yes, I said. How are you this calm? I did not answer immediately. I waited until the chamber had settled into its post-verdict routine. The delegates, murmuring to each other, staff, collecting documents, or in Vash, accepting congratulations near the east exit. I watched Vash laugh at something a colleague said. I watched Ursalin move on to the next item of council business with the easy efficiency of a person who has just checked off a task and is ready for the next one. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and took out a small communications device, a personal unit, encrypted, not connected to the council's monitored network. I had carried it every day for the past 6 months. I had been waiting for this moment in the way a person waits for a signal they have been promised, not with anxiety but with a readiness that has settled so deep it no longer feels like waiting at all. I composed a single-word message. I addressed it to Dr. Nora Calloway, lead director of the Exodus program, currently stationed in a facility 300 m beneath the Atacama Desert in Chile. The message read, "Green light." I sent it. I put the device back in my pocket. Cole was still watching me, his expression somewhere between confusion and the early edge of alarm. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "what did you just do?" I stood up, straightened my jacket, and looked out across the chamber one final time at the 400 species who had just closed the door, at the curved walls and the high ceiling, and the cold white light that had been illuminating this room for centuries, while one civilization after another stood at that podium and tried to explain themselves. I gave them exactly what they wanted. I said. Then I walked out. I did not look back. There was no reason to. Nora Calloway did not celebrate when the message arrived. She read it once, set down her coffee, and walked to the main operations board. At the center of the facility, around her, a team of 47 scientists and engineers were already at their stations. They had been ready for this moment for 8 months. They had run every simulation, tested every variable, argued every assumption until no arguments were left and only the work remained. Nara looked at the board. She looked at her team. She was a small woman with short gray hair and the kind of stillness that comes not from the absence of pressure, but from years of learning to work inside it. "All right," she said, "we are on." Nobody cheered. Nobody needed to. They went to work. That was the moment the real story began, not in the council chamber, not in the exile decree or the vote. The real story began in that underground room in Chile with 47 people preparing for the day the rest of the galaxy stopped paying attention to us. What followed was not a tragedy. I want to be clear about this because the galaxy assumed it was. The council issued progress reports at regular intervals, written by serious scholars using genuine historical data, listing projected resource shortages, probable political fragmentation, and estimated timelines for technological regression. They were careful, well-researched documents. Every single projection was wrong. I was 44 years old when the barrier went active. I watched it seal from a transport vessel carrying the last of Earth's diplomatic staff home. From the outside, the barrier was a shimmer in space, a barely visible distortion, running in every direction as far as sensors could reach. From the inside, it was invisible. You would never know it was there unless you tried to leave. We did not try to leave. We had too much work to do. The first thing that changed was the politics, which surprised some observers but should not have surprised anyone who thought about it carefully. For decades, human nations had been running their old competitions because there had always been an outside world to appeal to trade with, to use as leverage against each other. The moment the barrier closed, all of that was gone. There was no outside world, there was only us. Within 8 months, a unified planetary government was operating for the first time in human history, not because humanity had suddenly become wise or peaceful, because it had become practical. A fragmented species cannot execute a multi-generational engineering program at the required scale. Everyone understood this. The arguments that followed were fierce and sometimes very difficult to sit through, but they were arguments about how to build something, not about whether to build it. That distinction made an enormous difference to what came next. Nora Calloway's Exodus program became the structural spine of everything. I remember visiting the main campus in Chile about 2 years after the barrier closed and being struck by how ordinary it looked from the outside, a collection of low buildings in a dry valley, surrounded by equipment and the constant, purposeful movement of people going somewhere. Nothing announced what was being planned. Inside, nothing announced what was already being built in 17 facilities on 4 continents and in 6 orbital stations above the equator. What was being planned was the removal of every ceiling humanity had ever accepted as permanent. The first decade was about energy. The sun produces in a single second more energy than humanity had consumed in its entire recorded history. We had known this for centuries and had begun, cautiously and slowly, to harvest a fraction of it. Caution and slowness were no longer acceptable ways to operate. The Dyson project began in year 3 of the exile, not one project but 4,000, running simultaneously, coordinated by a global engineering network and supported by fabrication facilities, producing solar collection units at rates that would have seemed unreachable a decade earlier. By year 7, the array covered 4% of the sun's surface area. By year 11, it covered 38%. And the power flowing through that system was so far beyond anything previously available that it required the invention of entirely new infrastructure just to handle it. Transmission, storage, distribution, all of it rebuilt from the foundation. This turned out to be an advantage because the rebuilt systems were cleaner and more efficient by orders of magnitude compared to what had existed before. When you are forced to start over, you can start over correctly. The second decade was about the body, and I am going to take more time with this one because it is the development the galaxy found most difficult to comprehend later. The reason for that difficulty is that they could not imagine the conditions that produced it. When you are isolated, and you know the isolation is permanent unless you do something extraordinary, death becomes an engineering problem rather than a philosophical inevitability. Every person who died in the early exile years was a person whose knowledge and skill and accumulated understanding was gone permanently in a civilization that needed every advantage it could find. That was a cost no one was willing to keep paying. Dr. Priya Uz had been working on cellular regeneration for 9 years before the exile. She had solid results, moderate funding, and a publication Record her colleagues respected. After the exile, she had unlimited energy from the Dyson array, access to every research facility on the planet, a team of 200 people, and no bureaucratic structure standing between her and the next experiment. She solved the core problem in year 14. The broader applications took another 6 years to develop and scale to a population level. By year 20 of the exile, death from biological aging had been eliminated for 91% of the human population. The remaining 9% were inactive treatment. The number reached effectively 100% before year 23. I was there for all of it. I watched it happen, one person at a time, then one district at a time, then one continent at a time, until it was simply the condition of being human. I watched people who had expected perhaps 10 years of life remaining turn back to their work with a focus and depth that is difficult to fully describe in words. When time is no longer the thing being spent, everything changes. Every project, once too large to complete in a single lifetime, became manageable. Every idea deferred because there would never be enough years to finish it came back off the shelf. The work became serious in a way it had never been before, not frantic or desperate serious, the kind of serious that comes from knowing you will be alive to see the outcome of whatever you choose to build today. The third decade was about the barrier itself. The Council's quantum lock technology was impressive work. The VETH had developed it over many years, and it was considered among the most sophisticated containment systems in the known galaxy. It had been used twice before on isolated civilizations, and in both cases, those civilizations had never come meaningfully close to breaking it. We had two advantages they had not possessed. The first was the energy output of a Dyson-wrapped sun. The second was a woman named Alice Renner. Alice was 31 years old when the exile began. She had a background in quantum field theory and a habit of working 20-hour days that her colleagues found both admirable and slightly alarming in the estimation of everyone who worked with her. She was the most purely focused analytical mind currently operating on the planet. She spent 5 years studying the barrier, not attempting to break it, just studying it, building a model so precise and detailed that she could predict its behavior in response to any stimulus before the stimulus was applied. Her research from this period ran to thousands of pages of calculations that very few people could follow from beginning to end, but the conclusions, when they arrived, were straightforward enough. The barrier had a flaw, small, theoretical, and completely irrelevant. Under normal conditions, a seam in the quantum lock structure where two independent field generators overlapped imperfectly at a specific resonant frequency. No standard civilization had the energy sources to exploit it. It was, by every practical measure, not a vulnerability at all. With the focused output of a 38% Dyson array channeled through a resonance amplifier of Alice's design, it was a door. We spent 4 years building the amplifier. We tested it 17 times against miniature contained versions of the barrier field. Every test succeeded. In year 31, we opened the door for the first time. Not to escape, we had no particular interest in that. The solar system the Council had condemned us to was home to a civilization of extraordinary sophistication, and we had no desire to abandon it. We opened the door because someone outside had sent a signal that our automated systems received, because what that signal described was something we could actually fix, and because the galaxy had been quiet about us for long enough, it was time to say something back. The signal arrived at 4:17 in the morning local time at the monitoring station in northern Iceland, where Cole Whitfield had been working for the past 6 years. Cole was 57 now and looked 43, which still surprised him sometimes in the mirror. He had been among the first in the northern European sector to receive Priya Asai's treatment back in year 19, and the absence of aging had never quite stopped registering as unusual. He had spent enough years as a young man, assuming he would get old, that the reversal still felt on certain mornings like something that needed to be confirmed again. He was reviewing trajectory data from the outer barrier monitoring array when the emergency signal arrived. His system flagged it automatically. He read it twice, printed it on paper. He only did this when something was genuinely significant, and walked directly to the communications office 3 corridors away, where I was reviewing the morning reports over coffee that had gone cold. He set the paper on my desk without a word. I read it. The Veth home system was facing an extinction level event, a rogue stellar object, a neutron star traveling at an angle no survey had predicted, was on a confirmed collision course with the Veth primary system. Impact was estimated in 42 months. Veth scientists had done the modeling thoroughly. They knew exactly what it meant. The signal had been broadcast to every member species of the Galactic Council, requesting emergency assistance. It had also been broadcast because automated emergency systems do not pause to check political records on the general frequency that included Earth's solar system address. The Council's communications director caught the error 4 minutes after transmission and issued a correction, noting that the Earth address was included in error and that the exile decree remained fully in effect. He was 40 seconds too late. The Council's best combined response reaches 3 degrees of trajectory correction, Cole said, his voice careful and even. I ran the modeling they included. I know, I said. The Veth need 11 degrees. I know that too. Cole stood on the other side of my desk and waited. Outside the window, the Icelandic sky was beginning to lighten. At the edges, a thin pale line running along the horizon above the water. It was going to be a clear day. Leon, he said. I know what you're going to say, I said. They voted for the exile, he said. Oren Vash built that case for 14 months, and the entire Veth hegemony endorsed every page of it. They stood in that chamber and asked the galaxy to lock us away permanently, and now they need us. Yes, I said. Why should we help them? I looked at him for a moment. Cole had been with me for 31 years. He had been in that chamber when the vote happened. He had been on the transport when the barrier sealed behind us, and I had watched him look back through the observation window at the shimmer of the lock with an expression I had never asked him about, because some things belong to the person feeling them until they are ready to say them out loud. I understood why he was asking the question. It was the fair question. It might have been the most reasonable question available in this situation. Because they need help and we can provide it, I said. That is the first reason. And GT snorts. And GT. The second reason is that the galaxy needs to see us provide it, not hear it. Described secondhand, not read it in a report. See it. Every species watching. Every broadcast receiver that carries this story, they all need to see who we actually are. Cole waited. The exile did not make us into something smaller, I said. That was their expectation. That was what their models predicted. They were wrong, and right now they do not fully understand how wrong they were. This is how they find out. Cole held my gaze for another moment, then nodded and reached for his communications panel. The line to the Veth Chancellor's office took 14 minutes to open. There was a delay on her end that I understood completely. She had not expected this call. She had possibly not considered it possible. The fact that she accepted it at all told me something important about Dira San before I had even seen her face on the screen. She was a person who made decisions even when the decisions were uncomfortable to make. Her face appeared on the display. She was older than the photographs in our intelligence file, with deep-set eyes and an expression that had been carefully composed but was not entirely successful at hiding the weight underneath it. She had been chancellor for 4 years. She had inherited a crisis that arrived without warning and was, by every calculation her scientists could produce, unsurvivable with available resources. Ambassador Hargrove, she said. Her translator gave the words the flat, neutral tone. All council translation software used. Chancellor San, I said, thank you for accepting this call. I was not certain I should, she said. I want to be honest about that. I appreciate the honesty, I said. I always have. You received our signal. Yes. The correction the council is offering will reach 3 degrees, I said. Yes, I ran the modeling. The council is committing significant resources. 3 degrees is the correct result for those resources. She studied me carefully. She had been told by council reports and scholarly consensus that the isolated human civilization was in decline. She was now speaking with a man who had just demonstrated, without announcing it, that we had been monitoring galactic communications for an unspecified period and had performed independent analysis of her crisis modeling before she had even made contact. She was revising her model of the situation in real time, and she was doing it efficiently. What are you offering? She said. 11 degrees of trajectory correction, I said. The silence that followed was the longest of the conversation. That is not possible, she said carefully. Our combined resources in the full council commitment reach 3 degrees. 11 would require capabilities that are not documented anywhere in the current Galactic registry. Yes, I said simply and without elaboration. She leaned slightly forward. What do you want in return? Nothing, I said. No payment, no treaty, no political arrangement. She waited. She had enough experience to know there was more. One condition, I said. When it is finished, you stand before the Galactic Council and describe what you saw. Everything, the fleet, the technology, the method, the results, accurately and completely. You answer every question they ask. Several seconds passed. Behind her I could hear faint voices, advisors giving Rapid opinion she was choosing not to be guided by. You want them to understand what you have built, she said. I want them to see it, I said. There is a difference between hearing something described and watching it happen in front of you. She was quiet for nearly 30 seconds. Then, when can you deploy? Departure in 72 hours, transit time 9 days. I need updated trajectory. Telemetry every 12 hours from your Science Directorate. You will have it within the hour, she said. Thank you, Chancellor. She paused before closing the line. One more question you could have made. Contact years ago, you could have requested renegotiation. Why now? Why this way? I looked at her directly. Because this is who we actually are, I said. We needed you to see it. The line closed. Cole was already coordinating with Fleet Command before I turned from the screen. 90 vessels began pre-launch sequencing. That afternoon, by the following morning, the number had grown to 900. Because when word moved through the human network that we were going outside, for the first time in 3 decades, the request to be included overwhelmed every intake system we had. People had waited 31 years for this. I was not going to tell them to stay home. On the 3rd day, Alice Renner's residence amplifier opened the barrier door for the 2nd time in its operational history. It was wider this time, wide enough for a fleet. 900 vessels moved through the opening, a column that took 6 hours to complete. No ceremony, no announcement, just a steady, quiet procession of ships moving through a door that an entire galaxy had assumed we could never reach. I stood at the forward observation deck of the lead vessel and watched the barrier shimmer past on both sides. On the other side, the galaxy stretched out, unchanged, enormous and full of civilizations going about their business, with no idea what was moving toward them. I had forgotten how large it looked. Behind me, Cole said quietly, "How does it feel?" I thought about it honestly. Like the starting line, I said. The Veth home system had 7 planets. The 3rd and 4th were inhabited, home to a combined population of roughly 40 billion people who had been watching for months as the instruments tracking VSO7 continued to confirm what nobody wanted. Confirmed. We arrived on day 9, exactly on schedule. What I am about to describe, I experienced partly from the bridge of the lead vessel and partly through a live feed from the Council's own long-range sensor network, a network my communications team had been quietly reading for 9 years through systems developed as a secondary output of Alice's barrier research. The Council did not know we were monitoring their feeds. They would find out later. The point is that I watched in real time exactly what 400 species saw when they turned their long-range sensors toward the Veth system on the morning we arrived. They saw 900 ships appear. That alone stopped several conversations across the galaxy simultaneously. The Council had already been tracking the barrier opening. The quantum distortion when we departed was impossible to miss, and the emergency session that convened immediately after our departure from the solar system had been, by all available accounts, the most heated internal council meeting in recent memory. But tracking a departure from hundreds of light years away is one thing. Watching 900 vessels come into standard sensor range of a system that the entire galaxy was focused on is something else entirely. The ships were large, not the largest in the Galactic Registry, but significantly larger than anything humanity had been launching before the exile, and the uniformity was striking in a way that took the Council's analysts a moment to process. Every vessel was identical to every other within fabrication tolerances that implied manufacturing methods far beyond anything practiced in any council shipyard. The analysts began calculating construction time. They kept arriving at numbers that did not match their models. The actual figure was 19 hours per vessel, all fabrication lines running simultaneously. 22 days total for the entire fleet. The analysts ran this calculation 4 separate times. They set it aside because they could not reconcile it with their existing understanding of what was physically achievable. Alice Renner's deflection array was not housed on any single ship. It was a distributed system that assembled itself. After the fleet arrived, a series of precisely positioned emitter units deploying in sequence to create a resonance field around VSO7. The deployment took 11 hours. The field produced no visible light, no dramatic display. It simply existed, distributed across a volume of space, doing work that no instrument currently in the VETH system had the calibration to fully characterize. VETH astronomers watching through their own equipment saw the trajectory chain begin 40 minutes after the field went active. It was gradual at first, then steady, then on every instrument in the system, simultaneously undeniable. Final trajectory correction, 12.4 degrees. The VETH home system was safe. In the council chamber, watching through long-range sensors, no official statement was issued for 17 hours after the correction was confirmed. 17 hours of silence from an institution that normally released a formal response to any galactic event of significance. Within 90 minutes, the analysts were still running the same calculations repeatedly and arriving at the same impossible answers. I used those 17 hours to meet with Chancellor Dirasan. She came aboard the lead vessel herself. She arrived with a security detail of 4 that she dismissed at the airlock, and she walked the corridors of the ship with the focused attention of someone who is intentionally memorizing everything they see. She paused at a fabrication bay viewport for a long moment before continuing. I did not rush her. We met in the main conference room. Simple, well-lit, a table with 12 chairs, a window looking out at the VETH system's blue-white primary star, and the 4th planet turning in the distance, its oceans visible from orbit. We sat across from each other. My science directorate has been analyzing your deflection system since deployment, she said. I expected they would, I said. They can measure the output precisely. They cannot identify what is generating it. No, I said, they would not be able to. With current instruments. She placed both hands flat on the table. An old VETH gesture indicating careful consideration. I want to ask you something as an individual, not as a representative of any institution. I am asking because I'm standing inside a ship that should not exist, in a room that should not exist, looking at a star my civilization nearly lost. Ask, I said. In 31 years, she said. How far did you go? I looked at her steadily and did not hurry my answer. We solved aging, I said. We wrapped our star for power. We broke the quantum lock from the inside. We built a fleet of 900 ships in 22 days. We deflected a neutron star. I paused. And those are the things we are comfortable showing you today. Dear Essen did not move for a long moment, then she nodded slowly the way a person nods when they have arrived at an answer they were not quite expecting, but find they can accept. The council will want a complete briefing, she said. I know, I said, and I will give them one, but the condition comes first. She stood up and straightened her jacket. She looked out the window at the star burning steadily where it had always burned, in a system that was going to continue existing because of what we had chosen to do. I will tell them everything I saw, she said. I gave you my word. I know you will, I said. She moved toward the door, then stopped. Ambassador Hargrove, she said without turning around, I voted for the exile. I want you to know that I am aware you know this, and I am not standing here offering an apology or requesting forgiveness, but I want to say, and this is for you alone, not for any record, that I was wrong about what the exile would produce. I believed what the report said. I accepted the projections. Almost everyone did, I said. I know. She was quiet for a moment. That is what makes it worse. She left. I stood at the window for a while after the door closed. The star burned. The planet turned. Somewhere in the outer system, VSO7 was continuing on its newly corrected path, moving away from the inhabited worlds at an angle that would carry it clear of the system entirely. Within 6 months, Cole came in and stood beside me without speaking for a moment. 16 species have already sent informal contact requests, he said, in the last 4 hours. Log all of them, I said. They all voted for the exile. I know, log them anyway. He was quiet for another moment. What happens at the council session? The galaxy finds out who we became, I said, and then we find out what it decides to do with that. Cole looked out at the star. And what do you think it will decide? Something new, I said, for the first time in a long time, something genuinely new. The council's emergency session was called 22 days after the deflection. I attended without an invitation, without credentials, without any formal standing in that chamber. The exile decree was still on the record. No one had moved to repeal it. I had not asked anyone to. I walked through the main entrance of the council chamber on the morning of the session, took a seat in the observer gallery along the east wall, and waited. The door staff noticed me within roughly 40 seconds. A young Kalan official approached and explained in courteous and measured language that I had no credential for the current session and would need to leave. I understand that completely, I said, without any urgency or irritation. Please note my presence in the session. Record and inform Chair Ursulan that Leon Hargrove is present and requests recognition. She blinked, went away, came back with a supervisor. The supervisor covered the same ground in more formal terms. I understand completely, I said again. Please pass my request to the chair. The session was scheduled to begin in 8 minutes. Ursulan appeared 6 minutes later, moving through the side corridor with the careful, unhurried pace of a man who had been doing this job long enough to have developed genuine patience with unusual situations. He was older than I remembered from 31 years ago. His movements carried the particular deliberateness of accumulated responsibility. He looked at me. Ambassador Hargrove, he said. Chair Ursulan, I said. You have no credential for this session, he said. No, I said, I do not. He studied me in the quiet, thorough way of a person who is trying to fully understand something before responding to it. You deflected a neutron star, he said. My people did, I said. With 900 ships that did not exist 4 weeks ago. 22 days of fabrication, I said. 9 days of transit in each direction. He absorbed this. He did the arithmetic quietly and arrived at the same place. His analysts had been arriving for days. Then he said, come in. The session opened with Chancellor Dereson's testimony, delivered from the same speaker's platform where I had thanked the Council for exiling us 31 years earlier. She spoke for 43 minutes without notes. She described what she had witnessed from the moment the fleet arrived in the Veth system to the moment the trajectory correction became confirmed on her own scientists' instruments. She described the ships and the fabrication tolerances her science directorate had measured and could not explain. She described the deflection array and the field it produced and the gap between what had been achieved and what the Council's combined effort would have achieved. She described the conference room aboard the lead vessel and the conversation we had and what I had told her about what had been built during the exile years. She described it accurately and completely. She did not soften anything. She did not position it diplomatically or frame it in ways that might reduce its impact. She stood at that podium and told 400 species and every broadcast receiver in the galaxy tuned to the Council feed exactly what she had seen with her own eyes and measured with her own instruments. When she finished, the chamber was quiet, in a way different from normal pauses between speakers. It was the quiet of a very large room, full of very intelligent beings who are all processing the same information and arriving along separate routes at the same destination. The first question came from the Kalan delegation. Their senior representative, a woman named Yara Eld, stood and directed her question not at the podium but at the observer gallery where I was sitting. Ambassador Hargrove, she said, are you willing to share the technologies developed during the exile period with member species of the Council? Every head in the chamber turned toward me at the same moment. I stood up. Yes, I said, all of it, every technology developed in the exile period, freely provided to every member species, with no conditions, no licensing, no political requirements. The energy systems, the fabrication methods, the medical advances, the field theory work, all of it freely given. The murmuring that rose was immediate and covered the entire chamber floor. One condition, I said, raising my voice to carry cleanly over it. The room settled. Every pair of eyes in the chamber was on me. The exile decree will be read aloud, I said, in full at this podium by Chair Ursulan in this session before we close today, and when the reading is finished, there will be 3 seconds of silence. The chamber was completely still. Ursulan from the elevated chairs platform looked at me steadily. That is all you ask? That is the condition, I said. A pause. Why 3 seconds specifically? He said, not as a challenge, as a genuine question from a man who genuinely wanted to understand. I had thought about this answer for a long time. I had turned it over during the 9-day transit from Earth in the Quiet hours when the fleet was moving through open space and the work was done, and there was nothing remaining but thought. I had considered it while the deflection array deployed and while the neutron star's trajectory changed on the display in front of me, and while I sat across from Dirasan and she looked at a civilization she had misjudged for 3 decades. I had decided what I wanted to say, and I had decided to say it without decoration. There are species out there right now that your surveys have not yet reached, I said. Species looking up at their sky, alone trying to understand what is out there and whether it is safe to reach for it. Some of them are going to make mistakes. All species make mistakes. Every species in this chamber has made mistakes. The question has never been whether a civilization is perfect. The question has always been whether you choose to help it grow or whether you decide its imperfections justify. Locked door. I let that rest for a moment. The 3 seconds are not for us, I said. We do not need them. We are past the point where they would change anything. For us, the 3 seconds are for every species in this room and every species watching this broadcast right now to sit quietly together and consider what it actually costs to decide that someone's mistakes are unforgivable. What it costs you as the one who decides, what it costs them as the ones who are locked out, what it costs the whole galaxy when the answer to difficulty is permanent exclusion rather than help. No one moved. And then I said, we can begin the part where we all do something better. The silence that followed was longer than 3 seconds, much longer, the kind of silence that fills a room completely and does not feel empty. It feels full of something that the people in it are working through. Then Ursulan rose and walked to the podium. He called up the exile decree on the chamber display, the same document that had been read in this room 31 years ago, all 400 member seals along the bottom. He read it in full, the same flat official tone he had used 31 years ago when I had been the one standing at that platform trying to explain a civilization that the council had already decided it understood every charge, every term, the quantum lock barrier, the phrase permanently excluded, the word forever. He reached the end. He stopped speaking. 3 seconds passed. In that chamber, with 400 species present, and the full galactic broadcast network carrying the feed, those 3 seconds were not brief. They carried the weight of 31 years. They carried the weight of a barrier that had been built with confidence and broken from the inside. With care, they carried the weight of 40 billion people on 2 inhabited planets who were alive today because of a decision made in a communications office in Iceland at 4:17 in the morning. They carried the weight of every civilization that had been isolated and had not had what we had, the refusal to accept the ceiling. When the 3 seconds ended, Ursulan set the document down. He looked out at the chamber for a moment before speaking. The record will show, he said, that the exile decree of Earth has been formally reviewed in open session of the Galactic Council, and that the Council acknowledges the events of the past 31 years and the events of the past 30 days. He did not call for a vote to repeal the exile. I had not asked for one. A repeal vote would have turned this into a procedural event, a bureaucratic correction, a line in the administrative record. That was not what today needed to be. Today needed to be what it was, the moment the galaxy understood, in a way, that could not be revised away or reframed later, that its model of humanity had been wrong from the very beginning, that the exile had not corrected in error, it had simply removed the only party capable of demonstrating that the error existed. Cole was in the observer gallery beside me. I could feel him waiting for a signal, for some expression of satisfaction or relief or vindication. I felt none of those things exactly. What I felt was the particular quiet of a very long piece of work reaching its completion, the feeling of having carried something for a long time and being able to set it down, not because you are tired of carrying it, but because the carrying is done and the thing it was building toward is now real and standing on its own. I had been Leon Hargrove, Earth's final ambassador for 31 years. I was ready to be something else now, something that did not have a title yet, because the role did not yet exist and would need to be invented the way everything useful gets invented, by people who looked at what the situation required and decided to build it rather than wait for it to appear. Cole said quietly, "What comes next?" I looked out at the chamber, at 400 species sitting in a room that was no longer the same room it had been 2 hours ago. At Ursulan stepping back from the podium with the expression of a man who has just done something he knows will be part of the historical record for a very long time. At Dira San in the Veth delegation space, watching me with the expression of a person who has revised their understanding of something fundamental and is still living inside the revision, feeling its edges, at the curved walls and the high ceiling, and the cold white light that had been illuminating this room for centuries, while one civilization after another stood at that platform and tried to justify their existence to a room full of species that had already decided the verdict. "Everything," I said. I did not smile. There was no need for it. The smile at the end of the vote 31 years ago had been a signal, a message, sent to a room full of people who did not yet understand what they had set in motion. This moment needed no signal. Everyone in the chamber already understood. The galaxy had 31 years of catching up to do. We had already decided to help it. Not because we had been asked, not because a treaty required it or a political calculation made it advantageous, because that is what you do when you have something that can help in someone who needs it. You help. You have always helped when the moment was clear and the need was real and the ability was there. That was what all the council's reports had missed. That was what the scholars and their careful projections had failed to model. That was what the exile had not accounted for and could not have accounted for, because it was not a policy position or a strategic calculation or a response to external pressure. It was simply who we are. The exile had locked the door. It had not changed the answer. Cole was already moving toward the chamber floor where representatives from 6 different species were approaching, with the careful, deliberate body language of people who have a question they have been holding for a very long time and are finally ready to ask it. I followed him. The next conversation was already beginning. It would be, I suspected, a long one. I had the time. We all did now.